Yeah, this is a response video on the subject of Ron Paul. You know, Matt Red Rocket, he did a video. I didn't see it till today. But anyway, yeah, I mean, look, I disagree with this guy on a lot of things because his philosophy is built out of a lot of fairy tales. And this, to me, is another fairy tale, huge, giant fairy tale. So, on to the video.
So I've got to respond to some Ron Paul critics here. But before I do, let's just be clear that when we're dealing with politics, there is never going to be a perfect candidate or a perfect system to put in place so that everybody's life is perfect. All we can do is try to find a way that minimizes the evils.
Well, I don't think Ron Paul critics are suggesting perfection, and yeah, I mean, we all know the lesser of evils thing. Yeah, that's what we're all trying to find, is the lesser of evils, and my point would be is that Ron Paul is the greatest of the evils.
And when I see Ron Paul, it's just a breath of fresh air. And no, I'm not saying he's perfect. I'm not saying that we should bow down to him and worship him. In fact, that's the exact opposite of the reason I would vote for him, because he does not want power.
Look, what he wants is to, create a policy, create a social circumstance. I mean, that's what most politicians, well, look, let's not even talk about most politicians, quite irrelevant. He's empowering people who do want power, okay? That's the issue here, is the people he will empower do want power.
He wants to return to respecting the Constitution and to limited government, limited power of this centralized bureaucracy.
Yeah, he opposes federal government. He doesn't oppose state government interfering in your personal life or a local government interfering. He wants to liberate state and local governments to be their the tyrants, to be the control freaks. He wants to liberate that control, and at the same time, liberate the individual who, wishes to be emperor, and buy everything in sight and own the human race.
Own our incomes, they own our property, they can pretty much do whatever they want to us.
Well, let's be clear on this. Evil, tyrannical force is a democratically elected government. All right? Yeah. Okay, it's either so your alternative is, instead of the democratically elected government, centralized evil government, we should allow corporate boardrooms to decide our fate.
Things here. First of all, on abortion, Ron Paul is personally against it, as most people are. Nobody wants to have to see a woman, kill her child. But I think it's the woman's personal choice at the same time. It's just a sad thing to see happen. But Ron Paul isn't gonna. He's not for a constitutional amendment to ban gay marriage. He says it's a state's issue, and the state should decide. The local government should decide if a woman is allowed to have an abortion or not. And most states are going to say that the woman is allowed. Maybe there'll be a few, especially conservative states, that will deny that right, but then move.
Well, first off, suggesting that Americans should have to move to secure basic civil rights seems a little bit unrespectful of property rights. What good are property rights if you're going to have to move all the time to retain your freedom, your civil liberties, the big government civil liberties, like, the right not to be classified as an undesirable. Well, anyway, yeah, abortion, right. So you think, it's your belief that most states would allow abortion rights if given the power. Well, I think you're completely wrong. I think the history proves that you're wrong, that most states will do exactly the opposite. and that abortion will be only legal in a couple of states, and that's the America you want. So the rich can go to New York City and get an abortion, and the poor can go to fucking hell. Yeah, great. Very ethical of you.
It's up to the people of the state to vote on whether or not abortion should be legal or not. Ron Paul isn't going to decree that it is or it isn't.
I know you're a young guy, but the term states' rights, it has a resonance for people my age. And we know what states' rights was about. States' rights is the right to be a bigot. And that's all it's about. Like I said, your vision of America is a bunch of segregation and a bunch of tyranny at the hands of little groups of fascist control freaks, and to this assumption that local government or state government is somehow less corrupt, less capable of being corrupt, and less ethically corrupt. It's just bullshit. The worst tyrants are local tyrants. I've learned that from experience. They have less respect for the United States Constitution, less respect for any obligations to anything other than their narrow perspective. And that's an ugly America you're supporting. It's a step backward, giant step backward.
And because there is a centralized system that has such a huge say over our entire country's economic system, those corporations can buy a few politicians and have laws passed which benefit them, which benefit huge corporations over small business owners. Ron Paul would level the playing field.
Ron Paul would simply shoot the umpire. That's all he would do. He would shoot the umpire. Okay, there would be no rules. The rules would be might makes right. If you've got the power, you can consolidate it, and you can manipulate any market you like. We saw it with the railroads. We saw it with big oil, earlier in this century, early in the previous century. And we've seen it too in this, I've made this point before. I mean, we know what free markets lead to. Consolidation of wealth, and inevitably you will have yourself a monarchy. That's how they were formed originally, just a consolidation of power. They owned all the property and they rented it to the peasants and the servants. And that's what you're advocating. It's the same road, the same exact road. You're not suggesting anything to stop it from happening, because you would have nothing to stop that consolidation of wealth. Nothing. And it's inevitable. That's the way it works in the real world. Wealth does consolidate. People win the big business lottery and they get a ton of money, and that ton of money, it is easier to make more money. And your whole conspiracy theory with this government thing, no, it takes more than 2 politicians to pass legislation. And you didn't even, why don't you cite a piece of legislation? All right, this legislation the big corporations are controlling is EPA legislation. The legislation they're controlling is consumer protection legislation. That's what they're controlling. There's no prejudice against small business. Point out the legal the obstacles. The federal government obstacles, by law, legislated that are and that do something to small business, that destroy small business. Besides the fact that small businesses should pay Social Security taxes for their employees, that one small obligation. Besides that, can you point to something? No, you won't point to anything, because there isn't anything. This is just a big fat canard. This is just a big, you talk about red herrings and straw men, this is just bullshit. A big pile of bullshit. It just doesn't exist. The only thing government is doing is putting regulations on big business. I mean, even the existing government doesn't even regulate enough. Companies like Microsoft were allowed to control a market for decades. Okay, and they did it by inhibiting and destroying and buying up anything that even smelled of competition. And that's what you're advocating. You know, I lived in the world where AT&T was the phone company, and we know, anybody who's lived through that knows what happens when corporations have that kind of power. There's nobody's ever going to be able to compete with them because their infrastructure advantage is just too great. It would take decades for another company to become competitive because they're never going to have the advantages of an established infrastructure and the advantage of mass production. It's always going to be difficult for small business to compete against big business. And to think it's any other way in the real world is just stupid. Really stupid.